The wind swept cold and damp along the Puget Sound, rattling the windows of the small station on Pier 55. Ethan Caldwell, a seasoned member of the Seattle Mountain Rescue, was leaning back in his chair, sipping lukewarm coffee that tasted faintly of rust. The room was quiet except for the occasional creak of old timber and the distant gulls calling over the water. The shrill ring of the landline cut through the stillness. Ethan reached for it, expecting a routine hiker inquiry, but the voice on the other end was breathless, edged with panic. "There's someone stuck halfway down the ridge near Mount Si. She's not moving. Please, you have to send someone." Ethan's pen scratched across his notepad as he took the details. But before he could say he'd dispatch a team, the door to the control room swung open. Chief Inspector Lawson stood there, his towering frame filling the doorway, his expression as cold as the wind outside. "Caldwell, leave it. That's not our jurisdiction." Ethan frowned. "It's a life-or-death call. She could be injured hypothermic." "I said leave it." Lawson's voice was steel. "Do not head out there. That ridge is off-limits. Orders from higher up." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. In all his years of service, he had never been told to ignore a distress call. There was always a reason to act, always a duty to the lost and the desperate. He looked back at the phone, still off the hook, the faint sound of wind and static carrying through the line. His eyes drifted to the map pinned to the wall, the red ink marking the dangerous slopes east of North Bend. He knew the area well, treacherous in winter, but not impossible for someone with the right skills. Outside, the evening light was fading, and the first snowflakes of an incoming storm began to fall against the pier. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, weighing the crushing weight of protocol against the deafening pull of instinct. The line was still open. The caller was still waiting. And deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. Snow thickened over the city through the night, wrapping Seattle in a muffled silence. The ferries in Elliott Bay moved like ghost ships through a veil of white, their horns low and mournful. Ethan sat in his small apartment on First Hill, the map of the Cascades spread across his kitchen table, a single desk lamp casting amber light over the creases and folds. He could still hear the caller's voice in his head, not just the panic, but the sound of someone desperately clinging to hope. He had tried to sleep, but each time he closed his eyes, he saw the ridge, steep rock faces crusted with ice, narrow ledges barely wide enough for a boot, and a sheer drop to the valley floor below. By dawn, the city was waking under a heavy sky. Ethan dressed in layers, pulling on his thick weatherproof jacket, his breath misting in the cold air of his flat. He told himself he was just going for a walk, but his boots, ice axe, and climbing pack told a different story. On the street below, a metro bus hissed to a stop, its lights hazy through the snowfall. A police cruiser rolled past, tire tracks marking the slush. Ethan crossed to a small cafe, the kind that opened early for fishermen and night shift nurses. Inside, he found Nadia Ruiz, a paramedic he had worked with on several rescues. She was stirring sugar into a paper cup, dark hair tucked beneath a beanie. "You've got that look," she said without glancing up. "The one you get when you're about to do something against orders." Ethan lowered his voice. "Someone stranded near Mount Si. We got a call last night. Lawson told me to ignore it." Nadia's spoon clinked against the rim of her cup. "Ignore it? That's not like him."
"Exactly.
"Which is why I'm going." Her gaze met his, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then she slid a folded note across the table, a weather report, handwritten, showing a narrow window before the storm would worsen. "I'm not officially going with you," she said, "but you might find me in the area." They parted ways outside, but Ethan could see her reflection in the cafe window, watching as he turned up Pike Street towards the light rail station. By the time he reached North Bend, the mountains loomed ahead, shrouded in cloud, their dark flanks dusted in white. He could feel the cold air spilling down from the heights, sharp and foreboding. He shouldered his pack and started up the trail, boots crunching over fresh snow. The forest swallowed the sound of the highway until there was nothing but the wind in the pines and the distant cry of a raven. Halfway up the first incline, he stopped. Ahead, the snow was disturbed, not by an animal, but by boots. 2 sets. One heavier, the other lighter, staggered. He was no longer the only one on the mountain. Ethan crouched low, tracing the outline of the boot prints with his gloved hand. The snow was fresh, but a light crust had already formed over the impressions, suggesting they were made a few hours ago. The heavier set of prints dug deep, deliberate. The lighter ones, offset and erratic, told of someone unsteady, perhaps injured. A gust of wind cut through the trees, rattling frozen branches above him. He straightened and scanned the ridge line ahead. The trail here was narrow, squeezed between a steep drop on one side and a wall of rock on the other. Above the rock face, a thin mist curled and drifted like smoke. The snow muffled everything, yet Ethan thought he heard something, a faint, rhythmic crunch, then stillness. He eased forward, every muscle alert. Around the next bend, the trail forked. The heavier prints veered left, climbing toward the ridge. The lighter, stumbling ones continued straight, following the narrow ledge. Ethan hesitated, heart pounding. Logic said follow the weaker tracks. Instinct whispered otherwise. The heavier boots might belong to whoever had called for help, or to someone keeping close watch over the victim. From his pack, he pulled a small flare, not to ignite, but to mark his location. He set it in the snow, just in case he had to find his way back in worsening conditions. The air was sharper now, tinged with a metallic scent that stirred unease. He moved left, climbing toward the ridge, boots gripping hard into the crusted snow. The prints ahead grew fresher, edges still crisp. Whoever made them was close. A few hundred meters on, he saw something half buried in the snow. A strip of red nylon fluttering in the wind, part of a torn backpack strap. He knelt to examine it, fingers brushing ice crystals from the fabric. Faint letters spelled out Columbia Sportswear. It was smeared with something dark, frozen stiff. The wind howled down the slope, carrying with it a sound that chilled him more than the cold. A voice, distant, ragged, calling out in short, broken bursts. Ethan's breath quickened. The voice was not asking for help. It was warning him. Ethan froze where he stood, every nerve straining. The wind carried the voice again, thin and frayed, almost snatched away by the gusts. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost frantic. He pushed forward, following the prints as they zigzagged up the slope. The snow deepened with every step, forcing him to drive his boots hard into the drift. His breath came in short bursts, clouds of white against the gray sky. The voice faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Ethan scanned the treeline, spotting movement. A dark figure crossing between two pines, no more than 50 meters ahead. Seattle Mountain Rescue, he called out. The figure paused, head turning slightly. Then, without a word, it slipped into the trees. Ethan gave chase, weaving through the snow-laden branches, his pack catching on twigs. The ground tilted sharply upward, the powder giving way to slick ice beneath. The figure ahead moved with purpose, vanishing behind a rocky outcrop. When Ethan rounded the corner, the trail ended abruptly at a sheer drop. Beyond, the valley stretched out in a frozen sweep, clouds rolling low over the peaks. The only sign of the figure was a lone glove lying in the snow, its fingers stiff with ice. He picked it up, turning it over. Inside, stitched into the lining, was a name, R. Lawson. His stomach dropped. The same surname as the chief who had told him to ignore the call. Ethan shoved the glove into his pocket and scanned the ridge. Tracks led away from the drop, winding back toward the ledge where the lighter prints had continued. He descended quickly, snow spraying from his boots, until he rejoined the second trail. The lighter prints were now joined by dragging marks, as if someone had been pulling a load. He followed them down a narrow defile, the air growing colder, the light dimming as the sun sank behind thickening cloud. At the base of the defile, he found an overhang where snow had drifted into a low, rounded mound. Beneath it, faint colors showed through, a torn blue parka, an outstretched arm. He dropped to his knees, brushing snow away until a face emerged, pale and frostbitten but still breathing. The woman's eyes fluttered open, clouded with exhaustion. "Don't trust him," she whispered. "Who? Who did this to you?" Ethan asked, but she shook her head weakly, gaze fixed on something behind him. He spun around, heart thudding, but the ledge above was empty. Only the slow trickle of snow from the overhang disturbed the silence. He wrapped her in his spare thermal blanket, marking the coordinates on his GPS. He would have to radio for evac, but something told him the person who left her here would be back before help arrived. Ethan's radio crackled, the signal weak in the deep gully. "Caldwell? Where the hell are you?" Nadia's voice was taut, urgent. "Got an injured female. Partial frostbite. Location marked. But there's someone else on the ridge." Static drowned out the rest. When the signal cleared, all he heard was, "Not safe. Lawson watch your," then nothing. The snow began falling harder, thick flakes swirling until the landscape blurred into white. Ethan knew the signs. Within minutes, visibility would drop to near zero. He secured the woman as best he could in the shelter of the overhang, promising he would return. Then he set off toward the ridge again, the wind now screaming through the trees. Shapes loomed and vanished in the whiteout, trees, rocks, or perhaps shadows that moved when he did. At one point, he thought he saw Nadia ahead, her dark beanie unmistakable, but when he reached the spot, there were only snowdrifts. Then, faintly, through the roar of wind, he heard two voices. One low, commanding. The other, Nadia's, pleading. The voices grew louder as he climbed, until he reached a narrow shelf just below the summit. There, half hidden by swirling snow, stood Chief Lawson and Nadia. She was on her knees, her hands bound with climbing rope. "You should have stayed in Seattle, Caldwell." Lawson's voice cut through the wind. "Now you're in something you don't understand." Ethan stepped forward, the ice beneath him creaking. "You left a civilian to die out here."
"Why?"
"What are you hiding?" Lawson's eyes narrowed. "Orders. From people you'll never meet. That ridge? It's not just dangerous. It's off-limits for a reason." Before Ethan could press him, Lawson yanked Nadia to her feet and backed toward the cliff edge. "Turn around and walk away, Caldwell, or you'll both vanish in this storm." A sudden gust tore across the ridge, and the snow beneath Lawson's boots shifted dangerously. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The shelf gave way beneath Lawson's left boot. In that instant, Nadia twisted free of his grip, stumbling toward Ethan. Lawson fell to one knee, clutching at the rope tied to his pack. "Help me," he roared, snow whipping into his face. Ethan hesitated, the memory of the abandoned woman flashing in his mind. Then instinct overrode hesitation. He lunged forward, grabbing Lawson's wrist. For a moment, they were locked in a frozen tableau, snow swirling around them. Then Lawson's other hand moved, not to steady himself, but to pull something from his coat. A black pistol. Ethan wrenched his grip away just as Lawson's weight shifted backward. The rope slipped free, and the chief disappeared over the edge, his shout cut off by the wind. The storm swallowed the sound. Nadia's face was pale, her eyes wide, but she said nothing as they fought their way back through the whiteout. When they reached the overhang, the injured woman was still there, but the blanket was gone. So was the GPS marker Ethan had left. In its place, carved into the snow with the tip of a knife, were 3 words: "He will return." Nadia stared at the message, then at Ethan. "Lawson's gone." "Not if someone else is following his orders," Ethan said grimly. They secured the woman again and began the slow descent, but the storm had shifted the terrain. Landmarks were gone, the trail buried. Somewhere behind them, faint and steady, came the sound of crunching snow. Night had fallen by the time they reached the tree line. The storm had eased, leaving the forest eerily still. Ethan's headlamp cast long, swaying beams through the pines, each shadow stretching into shapes that might have been men. They were less than a mile from the trailhead when a figure stepped out from behind a cedar. Tall, lean, wearing a dark coat dusted with snow. His face was half hidden beneath the hood, but his voice was clear. "You're in possession of something that doesn't belong to you," he said calmly. Ethan shifted his stance, keeping Nadia and the woman behind him. And what would that be? The man smiled faintly. The truth. Before Ethan could reply, the man melted back into the trees, leaving only the whisper of snow falling from the branches. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch snapped. Then another. They were no longer alone on the mountain, and the real danger was only just beginning.